Good morning all, and welcome to another stroll around a historic village somewhere near to Peterborough. We're actually going to be wandering around Barnwell, just west of Oundle, just off the A605. Drive through it a lot, never walk through it. There seems to be a lot of interesting and historic places there, so quite looking forward to this one. Also looking forward to the sun coming out, because they've all said today will be the first day of summer. At the moment it's quite chilly and grey, and it was even raining a few moments ago, so I think it's going to be a getting better day. I'm actually starting about a mile away from the village, at Barnwell Watermill. Can't really miss it out. I know it's not in the village, but it's Barnwell, so I'll swing the camera around and share it with you. There you go, we're around the back of the mill. I'll show you the frontage in a mo. Like all surviving watermills, this one's long since stopped milling around about the late 1950s. This building, this version of the mill, dates back to the 1760s if I recall correctly, but there's been a mill here since way back, probably Anglo-Saxon times. I think it was referred to in an Anglo-Saxon chronicle somewhere, and I think that was about 9th century, so there's always been a mill here. This will be the biggest mill that was ever here. This was built, as I say, in the 1700s and finished milling in the late 1950s, which was very late for a water mill. Most of them had died off by then. This one battled on against all the odds. It used to have a steam engine room just on this right hand side of the building, because they desperately tried to up the ante basically and add to the water power with steam power to try and keep the mill going as a viable milling concern, but it died in the end. It was one of the last to go, as I say, in the late 1950s. And still a wonderful site. It's been a restaurant, as a lot of you will know, since it was a mill, and I think it's a business premises today. But it's still standing, and that's the main thing. There you go, that's the frontage, the pretty side. Right, time to trek on towards Barnwell village. You'll have to excuse the traffic noise. We're right alongside the busy A605, just where the turn into Barnwell village is. Just wanted to show you that road veering off to the left just ahead is where the old A605 used to go, into Oundle and then back out. The road to the right, where this lorry is coming from, this was the Oundle bypass, and I think it was built in the late 70s, early 80s, that sort of time period. And the significance of this new stretch of road is that it's where the railway used to be. So the track bed of the Nene Valley Railway would be underneath this modern and very busy and very noisy A605. And I wanted to mention that because we're just coming up to the remains of Barnwell railway station, which is kind of marks the road down into Barnwell village. So yeah, straight ahead is where the track bed of the railway used to be. They built the bypass on top of the track bed, and if it was still there you could trundle along it all the way to Oundle station, Yarwell station, Wansford station, and you'd be on the Nene Valley Railway. And I'm sure it was a lot quieter than it is today. Right, let's get off here. Station building still survives today. It's well looked after by the owners, which is always good to see. Built back in, well, back when the line was opened, which was, what, 1840s, closed in the 1960s. Actually, I think it was 1860s. No, it was 1840s. I was right the first time. Built in the 1840s when the line opened, closed in the 1960s when the line closed. It used to have a waiting room to the left of this station building. I'll just put this picture up and you can see it, and you may recognise it because it was moved from here in 1977 on the back of a lorry through the streets of Oundle all the way to Wansford, Nene Valley Railway Station. It's a pretty amazing photograph of the lorry carrying the waiting room through the streets of Oundle. Credit to the lorry driver for making this one happen. And it sits today at Wadsford Station. You've probably sat in it if you've been to Mean Valley Railway. Before we head off down into the village, that building in the background there used to be the post office in the 1800s, so a very early post office. Avoid getting run over. Yeah, it used to be the post office in the 1800s, closed in 1925 I think, only because I saw it up for sale in an old newspaper in 1925, so it may have finished then. But it was the post office. The thing that always struck me as strange with this building when I've seen it before is the upstairs window and what's above that upstairs window. It kind of looks like it's come from another building. It may not have done, but it's a sort of church-like, chapel-like appearance to what's above that window. Very strange. Probably worth mentioning because it'll have some relevance later on in the war. There used to be two Barnwells. There used to be a Barnwell All Saints, which is further on from here, and a Barnwell St Andrew, which is where we're walking into now. And they stayed as separate villages until I think it was the early 1800s, and then they were merged into one, Barnwell as we know it today. So we're sort of coming into the Barnwell St Andrews side of Barnwell village, and we'll be doing All Saints afterwards. Just heading down towards what is today's convenience store, stroke shop. Let the traffic go. The house on the right, in fact, it's got a sign on it which helps. Yeah, the house on the right, Northamptonshire County Police, is written on the wall. It used to be the old police house. This is an old house. There's a lot of old houses down here. Dates back to the 1600s and looks the part. Lovely windows. The Church of St Andrews. They must have known I was coming because they got the lawnmower out. You'll have to excuse the lawnmower noise. That lovely wall and doorway there, which I think goes through to the rectory. In fact, I know it goes through to the old rectory. It's a lovely window. I've been told by the chap cutting the grass it's the Gilbert Scott window, which will be named after Sir George Gilbert Scott, who I think it was mid 1800s, pretty much remodelled this church. I won't say rebuilt it because it's been here since Norman times, like most of them, 1200s. But again, like most of them, significantly rebuilt, remodelled in the 1800s, and this was no exception. Sir George Gilbert Scott did a lot of it. I think he did about 800 buildings, I read somewhere. He remodelled them, rebuilt them. He was a very well respected English Gothic revival architect, and he has his stamp all over this building. all over this church. Otherwise it's just another classic 1200s Norman church. Just turned around from the church now and looking across the field to that wonderful building in the distance. That used to be a girls' school, opened in the 1800s, pretty much, well, not far from where I'm standing now, in the grounds of the church. We'll talk more about it when we get there, but it was literally picked up and moved piece by piece to a new location. It was too good to destroy. But yeah, it was a girls' school in the church grounds. Beautiful window. That's an old one. I think they call them chest tombs or something of that nature. Dates the 1700s. If there's ever anything written on it, you're not going to see it now. That's a nice gravestone. We'll look into this one. Thomas Bell, 1862, and his wife Martha Bell, 1878. See what we can find out about this chap, and we'll put it on the bottom of the screen as ever. Love the old cobblestoned pathway. Be murder to walk on if you got married here in high heels. Unspoilt. That's a wonderfully old looking wall. It even looks like part of a building, but I think it's just the wall. And the door into what was and probably still is the rectory today, as far as I know. The Princess Alice Centre, which is opposite the church, used to be the village school. In fact, it was the village school until 2005, built in 1874. Absolutely glorious school building, but sadly, under much protest from villagers, it was closed in 2005, and the kids had to go to Oundle. Really, really nice school building that is. Parson Latham's Hospital. I'll let you read what's up on the wall and then I'll fill in what I can afterwards. What a magnificent place. These were all almshouses. Nicholas Latham, who ended his life here, although he was born in Brigstock, yeah, he donated funds, 1601 I think it said, to build these houses for the poor. He also built a school, which we'll see later on, or what's left of it later on. So he was a big name in these parts, very charitable guy. These don't date back to 1601, or bits do, but the buildings were rebuilt in the 1800s, updated as it were. I presume they were probably thatched in the 1600s. But what a lovely place, and they're still lived in today. I don't know under what sort of arrangements. Not a bad place to live at all. Interesting, on this gateway it says 1601 on the other side, 1600 on this side. Perhaps they did this side first. Coming into the heart of the village. The bridge itself is actually a listed construction. I was going to say listed building, but it's a bridge. Dates to the late 1700s. Just alongside the bridge, familiar to many, the Montagu Arms. That one goes back to the early 1700s. Good to see it still going. But yeah, many bridges cross this. This is Barnwell Brook. Runs into the Nene, somewhere near Oundle. It used to flood, believe it or not. I haven't got any pictures to prove it, but it certainly has flooded in the past. Distant past, up to a depth of about 5 foot. That's 5 foot into people's houses at this bottom end of the village. It's also completely dried up on occasions quite recently as well. Most of the buildings in Barnwell date back to 1700s, early 1800s. This one here, as it states on the wall, was once the reading room. You can actually tell from the windows at the bottom if you compare it to this picture. You can identify those windows. It was only single story when it was a reading room. It's now been made into a 2-story house. It used to be a big sort of community centre, or little community centre. It used to have dances here and all sorts, as well as it being once a reading room. And it was still being used by the community into the late 1900s. Just coming up now to this magnificent old girls' school that was moved from the church. I've got a scratchy old picture I'll put up which shows it sitting in front of the church in its original placement. Built in 1877, but I don't think it stayed there for too long. It was moved, it was closed shortly afterwards because it was a sort of time of free education starting to come in, and governments of the time having to build schools. This dated to before that time, but only marginally so. So it kind of timed it wrong really, the building of it. But it was all funded by a chap called William Bigley, and I don't know much about William, apart from he was based in London at the time. Whether he had a link to Barnwell, I assume he must have had, to pick this place as his beneficiary from his will, but he wanted a girls' school built. He was very keen on that and very specific about that, and he wanted it built in the churchyard or around the churchyard of St Andrews. The building was actually moved, presumably stone by stone, in 1915 to this location. Bigley's. It's Bigley's cottage now. (1838) it says. Re-erected 1915. Coming up now towards the posh end or the royal end, call it what you will, of Barnwell, which is where Barnwell Manor house is, and also Barnwell Castle. They're more or less both on the same site, and a wonderful bridge as well. This is another 1700s bridge. I believe that it originally carried, as would be logical, a footpath from the right, where that sloping path is. Used to be a path that ran from there to take the posh folk from Barnwell Manor across the bridge up to St Andrew's Church. This is where we were a few moments ago. Lovely bridge though. Getting views of the Barnwell Manor and the castle is very difficult. I'll do my best, but I've got a big collection of photographs, so I will share those later if I can't get anything better. It's not a place you want to be sneaking around. Still has royal links. Manor house, I think, was built around about the 1500s by Edward Montagu of the Montagu family. At around about the time when I think he basically was the lord of both manors, St Andrews and All Saints, and I'm pretty sure he was the guy who built it, although it's not 100% clear that that's the case, and I'm sure there was something here before then as well. My hunch, and I could be historically way off, is that the castle was the manor house when the manor was granted just after the Norman conquest. And then the sort of residential part of the castle was levelled and they built the manor house, because by the 1500s nobody wanted to live in a castle as such. Very, very grand building inside and out. Not that we will see today. I'll go and peep over that gate, but I daren't. The castle here dates back to the 1200s, and again, as we have in recent walks, this is all linked back to William I and his arrival here, and his planting of his chaps, his mates, his knights into various parts of England. Beringer Lemoyne, probably not pronounced that right. Beringer Lemoyne, I'll put it on the screen, was the chap that was granted, in effect, this manor of Barnwell All Saints. And this castle was his. I think there was something here before, less grand, but he made it his seat of power. And then it passed down through various descendants from that point until King Henry VIII hit the throne and basically ripped the world up, certainly ripped up the country, and that was a time when he gave it to Edward Montagu. This kind of started the reign of the Montagus in Barnwell. And as I say, I think it was Edward Montagu that built the manor house. In fact, I'm sure it is. He didn't want the castle. Used to have residential inners to the castle, but they were all level. It's just sort of outer shell now, as most castles are. And you can get here on open days, but today isn't an open day. As good as we're going to get. There's the castle. Classic Norman castle. And that's as much as you're going to see of the manor house in the distance. As our views are somewhat limited, I'll put up some wonderful drone footage here that will give you a better sight of both the castle and the manor house, and also show you how close they actually were. The manor house was put up for sale relatively recently. I mean, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester had it from the 1930s, but they moved out. It was too expensive to run. And these pictures I'm showing you are from the interior of the house. It is absolutely spectacular. £4.7 million, I think it was up for sale at, and it may still be up for sale. I don't think it's actually sold yet, but I think it's close. It was run by an antiques, big Windsor Antiques, I think they were called. But they are trying to sell it, so if you've got 5 million and you're quick, you might be able to buy it. Very nice. Looking back across the fields, up to a nearly sunlit St Andrew's Church. The sun is coming. Got a couple of pictures up here of what used to be known as David's Village Shop, what used to be Barnwell Village Shop. Which I think was here until 1980s, something like that, quite recent. And we're just coming up to the same place today. There's a row of, well, it's one big 1700s cottage now. I think it was 3 cottages before, but that used to be the village shop. The old village shop in the foreground. To the left in the distance, and we will wander up there shortly, that magnificent building with a sort of tall thatch. That was Nicholas Latham's boys' school, built in the very early 1600s. Still standing on site, as it were. Nicholas Latham's Charitable Boys' School, established here 1604, magnificent building again. Very nice. Crowson's funeral directors. Used to be the village wheelwright, I think it was, and carpenter. Used to make coffins here. There was also a funeral directors if they made coffins, I suppose. That lovely row of cottages there on the far right, number 46, I think it is. Used to be the post office. I think it probably was the post office that took over from the one we saw earlier. I think it closed in the early 1960s. Building ahead of us, you can see it used to be it's got a brick modification at the top, stonework underneath, so the original stonework would have a thatch on top, and that was the village blacksmith's, smithy, call it what you like. No idea of dates on that one, but definitely the village smithy, probably was still going early 1900s, I would guess. Don't get many of those nowadays. Surviving George VI letterbox. The road we've just walked up is very much Barnwell All Saints, as opposed to Barnwell St Andrews where we were earlier. This is the All Saints section of Barnwell, as was, named after the church, which used to be in the distance on the right that we're just coming up to. There used to be a stream, very little stream, that used to run down this bank from the church area. I don't think there's anything still here, but local residents used to bring their little youngsters, babies, and bathe them in these waters because they believed that it was therapeutic, would heal them of whatever they might suffer from. And that probably ties into the name of the village, Barnwell, because it's believed to have been derived from, well, the well bit's obvious, but the barn bit is believed to have been derived from the sort of northern term for baby, bairn. So it was Barnwell. And that also was believed to be because waters in the village had that same curing element for youngsters. And whether the two are the same, I don't know. Whether those waters came from here, I don't know. But the church was up here, so it kind of probably would be easy to believe in those God-fearing days of the past. Let's go up and see what's left of All Saints Church, because this one's a little bit different. Got lawnmowers again. Well, that is what is left of All Saints Church, which dates back to, again, Norman times, 1200s, but it ran into disrepair and was basically demolished in the early 1800s, except this bit. This is the chancel. So this would be the bit behind where the vicar would preach from. It's where the choir would sort of sit in a normal church. And this was saved because it had the burial place of the Montagu family. Several descendants in the Montagu family were buried in this chancel. So they kept it, they tidied it up in the late 1800s, and it still stands today. So it's just a chancel of a church rather than the whole church, but it's very nice. It's still a church. They still have services in here occasionally, about half a dozen a year or whatever. It's not very often open, but I've just been tipped off by somebody that says it might be open, so we might be able to get in a moment, which would be a real bonus. And there's a window open up there, which suggests it probably is open, so we can get in and have a quick look around. But yeah, that is what is left of All Saints Church. Very different. Let's go and try our luck. Wow. There's actually a picture up here of the church as it was. Look at that. Sir Edward Montagu. Very significant player in Barnwell's history, both here in All Saints as well as at St Andrews. Bit hard to read this. Beneath this chancel are buried, and there's a lot of Montagus and descendants of the Montagus from 1622 to 1884. (1671). Henry Montagu, Esquire. I think this was a youngster, I think he's only 3 years old, who drowned in the moat of the Manor house, which is just next door to the church. We'll be wandering up there. There's nothing to see, but we can find the site of where it was. And yeah, he fell into the moat around the Manor house and died aged 3 years of age. I put up that picture of All Saints Church when it was a church. Well, it's an illustration, not a picture. See if the chancel fits in. And I've just moved alongside the church now into the field next to it, and we have another torpel type lumps and bumps field with all sorts going on underneath, but nothing much to see now. Now this was where the manor house was, the Barnwell All Saints Manor House, believed to have been built in the early 1500s, again by Edward Montagu, but we know it was still here in the early 1700s. and then there's just no records after that. So suspicion is it probably lasted about 200 years, disappeared mid 1700s at a guess. But you've still got the lumps and bumps. I'll put up an illustration of what the actual house looked like. So you can see it's quite a grand building. And it looks like, I mean, there's a ridge here which I would suspect may have gone around the house. We may be walking right up to the walls of the house now, but I could be completely wrong. My suspicion is that we are standing in the moat, just as a guess, straight in front of us. I mean, we're up on the bank now. It's quite a significant bank, and I mean, you could make stories up. I mean, there's been written works about what each bump might be, but everyone's guessing really. Nobody knows for sure. I mean, there is another ridge that runs across there into the distance, so it's kind of hard to prove anything. But we are in, on, or very close to Barnwell All Saints Manor House as was. Not quite sure what's behind this hedge, but it's all fenced this side for some reason. Is it water? That's recognisable. That's a fish pond, medieval fish pond, and it would have sat next to the house, as medieval fish ponds tended to be. You've got that elongated rectangular, bit soft around the edges now, but yeah, that would have been a medieval fish pond where they would have grown, if that's the right term, fish like carp, which would have been harvested as a luxury item, as carp were in medieval times. Food for the table at the manor house. Yeah, that's nice. These banks are quite significant. I'm tending to, I don't know, I'm not a historian here. I tend to think the manor house was probably somewhere in front of us. This bank seems to swing round as though it's going around something, but I mean, it could have been a terrace in the gardens or anything. But as you can see, the church, or what's now left of the church, was right alongside the manor house, as was often the case. Just climbing down now back into Barnwell village. These sort of semi-detached cottage type buildings on the right coming up were built for the staff of Barnwell Manor. Not bad places. Very nice. And here we have a ford. I think there was more than one of these originally, until all these little bridges got put in. But this ford is still going. Couple of nice thatches here, or one nice thatch. Late 1700s, there used to be two cottages, as ever, knocked through into one now. One big desirable residence. Well, I'm nearly done. Just heading back now towards St Andrew's Church. I think buoyed by my success getting inside All Saints Church. The guy cutting the grass at St Andrew's reckoned it might be open by the time I come back, so I'd like to pop in there if only to see the resting place of the chap who seemed to have built a lot of these charitable concerns, Nicholas Latham, who I think is buried there. So if we can get in, then I will. Let's go and have a look. The house on the centre right there is the old bakehouse, as it says on the wall. Read an interesting story that back in the day, don't know when this was, probably early mid-1900s, let's say early 1900s rather than mid, the local villagers used to bring their Sunday joints up here on a Sunday morning, and they'd cook them in what must have been a gigantic hot oven, which made me chuckle a bit, the idea of multiple joints, and thinking, well, how do you know which joint was yours? But yeah, it was that's quite a bit of community spirit there, sharing an oven with villagers and their Sunday joints. Brilliant. It's the back of the old almshouses. In case you wonder why it was called hospital, I don't know is the answer. I really don't know. I mean, the building at the end's got a bell on it, which would suggest it was something other than just a house. But I don't know. Let's go and try our luck. Going back to All Saints, this is the chancel basically, the chancel of St Andrews. Sacred to the memory of William Bigley. He's the chap who we covered earlier, who funded the girls' school. In loving memory of Roland Parker, 1840-1926, who faithfully served this parish 40 years as headmaster of Parson Latham's school. So I'm learning something here. That building at the back of the almshouses must have been a school, which I didn't know, but it did look like a school. It had a bell, so that makes a bit of sense. Nice church. Didn't have what I thought was here, which is the resting place of Nicholas Latham, which I'm sure I read somewhere was in this church. But from what I can see, it isn't, unfortunately. As we saw at Houndle Church, you've got just lines and lines of old stones leaning up against the wall. It's a bit sad, really. I think I've just bumped into, she might be the vicar, I don't know. She didn't have a collar on. She probably isn't. Maybe the rector or something like that. Rectoress, is there such a thing? Lovely lady. She says Nicholas Latham was buried here under the altar in the church, and there is something in there on the floor commemorating that, and I've managed to miss it. So it's a bit embarrassing, so I'm going back in now because I came here to find that. I'm going to go and find it on the floor. St Andrew's Church, take 2. Right, on the floor. On the floor. Well, she says at the altar, or under the altar, so it must be right at the top end. Do you see anything? Oh yeah, something around the back. How am I supposed to find that? There he is. Here lies the body of Nicholas Latham. Great man in these parts, very charitable guy. Respect to him, rest in peace. Dated 1723. I'm pleased I found him. Never quite sure whether these characters are meant to be scary or what. Almost like Batman. No disrespect meant to anybody, but yeah. Why did they put these on churches? I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look it up because they look scary to me. Okay, that's it. That's the end. That's Barnwell village. Very nice. Quite noisy, you know. A lot of cars, a lot of tradesmen, a lot of building people here. Everything's being built or preserved, whichever way you want to look at it. But it's a lovely village. Really, really nice. Full of interest and well worth coming out here. You get a nice summer's day, especially if you've got a pub at the end of it. So, which it has, and it's a nice pub. But yeah, I've enjoyed that, and it's been a bonus to get into both churches. I didn't expect to get into either. So yeah, I've enjoyed that one. I hope, as ever, that there was something in there of enjoyment to yourself. And I don't know when I'm out again next. I'm running into more hobbies now that I kick in at sort of end of April. So not sure when I'll be out again, but knowing me, it won't be too long. So thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.